This is where it all began. I've hated this thing forever, and have been trying to give Jeff a good enough reason to get rid of it. Well, the Builders Challenge has allowed us to do that. Today we're going to show you how we built this credenza. This was a super fun build that was inspired by plans made by Jory, and we had free reign on them, so we honed them to our style and came up with this design. So, without wasting any more of your time, let's get building.
We've been meaning to replace that little cabinet for quite a while now, so we already had the wood. The Builders Challenge just kind of gave us the little push we needed to actually get the job done. So now that we're going to pull this wood out, it's time to start getting it processed. The lumber yard where we source this lumber from, all the wood comes surfaced on 3 sides, so it saves me a lot of time in the end. Now I'm going to head over to the table saw, cutting off that last untouched edge, making everything nice and square, but still leaving everything a little wide so I have a little room to work after I glue everything together. I'm going to end up having 2 glue ups. One long glue up, which will be 96 inches, and then another glue up, which will be around 55. I just cut everything a little long so I can cut off any cracks or anything I don't need. Now we'll head into my 3D drawing to show you what I'm talking about. So the long glue up will be the top 3 pieces, which will be continual grain. The bottom will just not really matter because it's not really going to be visible. Only the first couple inches will be visible, so that doesn't need to be continual grain. So now on to processing the lumber. For the most part, these are relatively square, so I'm not too worried about it. So I'm just going to put 2 clean straight edges on it after running them through the joiner so I can get a nice seamless glue up. And since this is only a 2-bore glue up, I'm not going to use dominoes, biscuits, or anything like that. It's just straight up glue. It's plenty strong. Once I get everything in the clamps, I like to check it with a straight edge just because certain pressure in certain spots can really warp or throw off your entire glue up. And now that everything's out of the clamps, I'm going to take this hand plane and knock down any visible high spots just to make life a little easier later. By day we sell furniture online, mostly small stuff on Etsy, so I kind of got to work around with what's already going on in the shop, so these little board tables come in handy a lot. Pop this up and we're ready to work. So here I'm going over all my final dimensions in SketchUp, and I'll jump into another animation and show you what we're working with. So I'm going to chop the long glue up into 3 smaller pieces so they're just easier to manage. And the other piece isn't that large, so it's fine how it is. I like to cut off as much of the end as I possibly can, just to remove any cracks that could give me trouble later on. These Bora tables are from my finishing room, so these weird little clear flakes that look like epoxy are just layers and layers and layers of polyurethane from spraying our trays every week. And since we are full-time woodworkers, we have the luxury to have large tools like this awesome drum sander. So, since we have an awesome large drum sander, I'm going to use this awesome large drum sander. And then after multiple passes through the drum sander, I'm going to head back over to the table saw, cutting all my pieces to their final width. But let's take a second to take notice of my super intense strength. Impressive, I know. And now that all of our pieces are to the final width, I'm going to focus on putting a profile on the face or the front of all the visible pieces, and I get a lot of questions on how I set certain degrees. And now that I started using SketchUp, it gets me close, but I still end up eyeballing and working to what looks good to me. And I actually ended up going with 55 degrees. In the drawing it's ended up being 50, but you can see the profile that we're adding here. It just gives it a nice clean look and a little extra dimension. It's actually a pretty common look in mid-century modern furniture. Now that we got all that figured out, I ended up setting my little Wixie gauge to 55 degrees. And then I ended up leaving about 1/4 inch of flat material on the face, as you can see here. Any less I think it would look too thin, and any more I think it would look too clunky. Now I'm going to hand these pieces off to Jess, and she's going to give them a quick sanding before we move any further. And while she's doing that, I'm going to work on making the center divider, pulling some walnut out of the wood pile, just cutting 3 pieces and gluing them together. And right here is when I realized, ½ inch short. Back to the wood pile. And now that we have that issue resolved, back to gluing up this panel. And I don't know what's more embarrassing. My extremely manly scream or my stone hands. And on to cutting the miters for the box. I'm going to put the saw blade a touch past 45, cutting the short sides on the table saw and the long sides with the track saw. Cutting the short sides on the table saw are just easier to manage, and this ensures that both pieces are the exact same length, since I didn't move the fence at all. And in order to get the continual grain on the top 2 sides, I'll use this drawing to explain what I'm doing here. Now imagine this is still a whole piece. As you can see here, there's a triangle cut out, so I'm essentially just cutting a 45 in each piece to give it the effect that it has continual grain. And it's important to make sure all your pieces for the box are the exact same size, and here I'm just kind of doing that by feel. If I had a big fancy crosscut sled, I probably would have just cut these on the table saw, but I don't, so this track saw will have to do. For best results, it's also important just to take a second and just appreciate those beautiful miters. And yes, the most loved tool on YouTube. I will be using the domino to assemble most of this, just because it's quick and easy. And a quick tip, I like to use just blue tape, or really any tape works for this, just to help control the squeeze out. Once it gels up, I like to pull it off, as you'll see later. Since we share pretty much everything to Instagram, I get a lot of tips, tricks, and things I should have done different. So this is probably my 3rd or 4th large glue up in this form. I would have definitely used an extended glue or an epoxy, and I need to work on my clamp game. As you'll see shortly, it's a mess. And as I mentioned earlier, the blue tape removal trick. Let it come up, comes off nice and easy. And as Jess would say, smooth as butter. Once all the glue gummed up, I took a chisel and just kind of scraped off any remaining gummy glue. And here I'm just removing any excess that was left behind. And over to the Onefinity to custom templates. The only thing I would have done different here is I cut the 2 individual pieces that didn't lock together, and I believe it was Izzy Swan that essentially locked them together using like puzzle pieces, which I thought was a really good idea, but I wasn't brought to my attention until after I cut these out. And then I'm just going to take these pieces and trace them onto my board to create the legs, and then just cut them out roughly on the bandsaw. And then I'm going to attach the templates I made to the pieces and then clean them up with a flush trim bit on the router table. And I used 2 methods here. The first time I used a brad nailer and just nailed them to the piece, which did work good, it held them in place, but Jess wasn't too happy about the holes I left behind that I had to later fill. And then I decided to use the tape and CA glue trick. Tape in each piece, it's essentially double-sided tape, but DIY. And all I had is this crappy flush trim bit, and it just wasn't big enough and took multiple passes, so I needed to order a new one. And now that I had 2 identical pieces, I just used a domino, put a large domino in each piece, and then just kind of glued it all together. If you're enjoying our content, please go hit that subscribe button, also that little bell to see any other future videos released by us. Thanks again, guys, we appreciate it. And once that cured, I'm going to go ahead and add the holes to accept the copper pipes, which you'll see in a second. And I use a spade bit for this. I should have used a Forstner bit, but I didn't have any that were the correct size, and our local hardware store is awful. So I continued these holes through. I used a 7/8 bit on top and a 3/4 bit on bottom, since the pipe was bigger than the washer and bolt on the bottom. And don't mind the stickers and printing on the copper pipes. I actually cleaned and polished these later and added clear coat before final assembly, but right now I'm just kind of getting everything together to make sure everything lines up and fits. Ended up drilling down a 1/4 inch where all the copper pipes would go, and I just used this little digital gauge to make sure everything was consistent. And then I used a 5.5-inch bolt to cinch everything down, and the base was rock solid. And now that the body and the base are done, it's on to the doors. I ended up gluing up 2 panels, and don't let this fool you. I stared at these pieces of wood for way too long, just to get the nice continual grain and try to get everything to line up nice and clean. So I just used the same templates as I used for the legs, so it would have the same exact arch, and transfer that onto the top piece. And then we'll head over to the bandsaw to remove the excess. And again, I didn't have a big enough router bit for what I wanted to achieve, so I had to do multiple passes, and then I ended up just blending it with the sander to get it exactly where I wanted it. And here I'm laminating the 2 pieces together using my fancy dancy glue roller and some Type-On 3. And the same issue before, I need more clamps. And if you were wondering what stain we use for our trays that we sell on Etsy, there you go. And now that the face is all glued together, let's hop into a drawing to show you what's going to happen next. So I need to cut the face into 3 pieces, 2 small drawers and 1 large pull-out, and each arch undercut will act as a drawer pull. I first cut each end, removing any gunk and giving me 2 square edges. And then I did another cut directly in the middle. And this cut by far was the most nerve-wracking. Oh, right there. Oh, I'm so worried about that just tearing out and breaking off that little thin chunk. I ended up reinforcing that piece later on, that's not really visible, just to ensure it didn't give me any problems down the road. And just when you thought everything was going so smooth, right here I realized, you're an idiot. Flip-flop the slides. Can't go in that way. And time for the shameless plug. Go follow us on Instagram. We post there almost daily. You can get live updates of what we're working on in the shop. As you can see here, we've been posting for weeks ahead of time before this was even posted to YouTube. So if you're interested, go check that out. We appreciate all of you. And time to set some drawer faces. We used the old playing card trick to get nice even gaps all the way around. Jess held it in place, and I just attached it from the back. I ended up pre-drilling holes and attaching these with screws. I just put 2 screws in, and then after everything was attached, I went back and added 3 more screws per drawer. And yes, I know, I need to try undermount slides. If you have recommendations, let me know down below. And time for a quick sneak peek before I rip this thing apart. So this will be a dog feeder buffet credenza holder. This is where the dog food will go, and then just miscellaneous dog items, leashes, medicine, and whatever. Treats will go in these drawers. And then the playing cards only got me so close. I ended up having to take all these out and fine-tuning them just so the gaps are nice and even all the way around. And then took the card scraper to remove any saw marks just so that the sander didn't round over any of the profile. And here I'm adding a rabbit with a rabbit bit just to accept the back panel to close off the piece. I should have done this ahead of time, but I really just completely forgot about it. So here's what I'll be using, just a 1/4 inch piece of MDF, and then removing any gunk left behind that wasn't able to get with the rabbit bit. A couple hand tools and we were back in business. I also had to clean out the corners because the rabbit bit left round corners, so I just did essentially the same method in the corners to make them square. I could have left them and rounded over the piece, but I just think it looks a little cleaner. And then Jess took over to do most of the sanding, and Mirka was one of the sponsors for the Builder Challenge, so they sent us this amazing sander along with the vac, and I highly recommend this thing. They did not pay us to say any of this or even ask for any of this, but if you're in the market for a sander and you can afford a high price tag, definitely check this thing out. But a sander can only get you so far, so I ended up cleaning up all the corners with the chisel so they stayed nice and crispy and didn't get all round and weird with the sander. So I've been using this walrus oil a lot on small items. I have yet to use it on a big item, so I'm going to use the walrus oil furniture finish along with the walrus oil furniture butter. I let the walrus oil soak in for a day, and then I followed it up with the furniture butter. And it gave it a nice beautiful color, and it looks amazing. So let's see how it holds up over time. And now I'll just hyperlapse through the assembly of this thing just because it's not the most exciting part. So I'm gonna get this thing together and reveal some beauty shots. And again, I ended up just using this 1/4 inch piece of MDF. I stained it with Jacobean just to give it a nice dark color, and then I just brad nailed it in. If this was for a customer, I would have sourced a 1/4 inch piece of laminated plywood that was walnut just so it looked more uniform, but since it's for me, it's not that big a deal. You guys remember this gross thing, right? Well, this thing was actually handmade, and we ended up refurbishing it when we first started woodworking, and boy, how far have we come. It was just such a fun build, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did. If you really like this content, please go give us a like and a subscribe. Follow us on Instagram, do all that fun stuff. I'm just gonna let you guys enjoy these last few clips and hope you all have a wonderful day.